From the Chesapeake Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental reporting, this is Chesapeake Uncharted, the podcast that uncovers stories about the bay, its interconnected ecosystem, and the people who rely on them. I'm Jeremy Cox. On today's episode...
And I told Al Gore, I said, if I see it, Tangier's only 4 feet above sea level. If I see the sea level rising, I'll say so. It's not political. It's not a political thing to me. Yeah. I mean, we're trying to survive out here.
Wait, did he just say Al Gore?
I told Al Gore.
That's what I thought he said. It turns out that when you're the mayor of Tangier Island, a lonely patch of land in the middle of the Virginia side of the Chesapeake Bay, you're bound to pick up a few high-profile acquaintances. But maybe a former vice president and Nobel Prize winner isn't impressive enough for you. Okay, then.
He said, Dad, you got to get home and get to the phone. The president's going to call you. Mm-hmm. And I said, President of what?
General Motors.
He said, Donald Trump's going to give you a phone call.
And he did. For about 10 minutes, James Eskridge, better known by his nickname Ooker, had the President of the United States on his line. The topic that dominated their conversation was climate change, or rather, their shared skepticism that we humans are to blame for a warming planet.
We both agree that I don't think man's the main cause of it. I think a lot of it is natural, and we're not going to be able to control it, really.
There were plenty of news-making moments during the Donald Trump presidency. So many that you would be forgiven for having missed this episode. But the people of Tangier certainly haven't forgotten. Since that day in the summer of 2017, media outlets from 36 countries have descended on the island.
And some countries have had multiple groups here, like Denmark, Norway, Germany. We've had folks here from all over Europe, Australia, Japan, South Africa. We even had some reporters here from Tangier, Morocco. They wanted to come, so.
I'm no fan of jumping on the media bandwagon. When I initially drew up the list of stories I wanted to do for this season of Chesapeake Uncharted, I'll admit that Tangier Island wasn't on it. It's been done to death, I said to myself. But a chance email and a friendly invitation persuaded me to come out and take a look myself. This episode grew out of my 3-day, 2-night trip to the island this past spring, a trip that changed my perspective on the isolated community. During this season of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're examining climate change. It's happening in the here and now, and not just at the North Pole and Antarctica. We're talking right here in the Chesapeake Bay region. With each episode, we're taking a close look at one slice of this new reality. Think of this as a snapshot in time before things get worse, when we as a society can maybe still change the future. How did Tangier Island become the symbol for climate change denial? Does the label even fit? And what does it all mean for an island that is shrinking by the day? We'll talk about that right after this short break.
Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you in part by Greenfin Studio, offering marketing and communications services for a greener world. Their team combines strategy, creativity, and scientific insight, setting them apart when conservation, sustainability, and scientific organizations need help telling their stories. See what they can do for you at greenfinstudio.com.
Welcome back. Today we're spending some time getting to know Tangier Island. The dominant narrative in most news coverage is that the people here dismiss climate change as a fact, even though the evidence is all around them. It's been a few years since a CNN climate change town hall and a Donald Trump phone call, put the island at the center of the country's climate debate. Maybe a new reckoning is in order. Tangier is one of only 2 inhabited islands in the Chesapeake that aren't connected to the mainland by a road or a bridge. You can only get there by a boat or a small plane. I opted for the boat.
Awesome. How often do you think you make this run?
Well, I do it 7 days a week year round.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah,
Nice, pretty weather.
Mark Haney is at the helm of the Tangier Island ferry. Just about all of the dozen or so people on board today are locals, people returning from work or errands. Our point of departure is Crisfield, Maryland. Before us lies 13 miles of open water glittering in the late afternoon sun. About halfway into our 45-minute trip, the boat passes over an invisible line, and we're officially in Virginia waters. Haney, likely not for the first time, patiently fields questions shouted by a reporter over the drone of a diesel engine.
How long have you lived on Tangier Island? How long have you lived there?
I believe I was born and raised there.
How far does your family go back?
Probably like 1901.
The leading industry by far on Tangier is seafood. Generations of inhabitants, mostly the men, have gone out on the water in search of a living. They dredge oysters in the winter and catch crabs in the warmer months. For years, Haney followed these rhythms as well. Life as a waterman enabled him to raise 2 boys to adulthood on the island with his wife Sharon. But by 2008, it was time to convert his dead rise boat to a ferry boat, he told me. He was getting older, and he felt like he was getting squeezed by the regulations intended to protect crabs and oysters from becoming overfished.
What they're doing, the rules and regulations, they're just getting everything worse than what it is.
Yeah.
In the sparkling distance, Tangier Island slowly comes into view. The contrast on the horizon is subtle. It begins as a wisp of gray and green, barely distinguishable from the surrounding water. Then you can make out a water tower and a church steeple. As the boat ranges within a few hundred yards, you become enveloped in one of the most distinctive views in this part of the world. Standing in the water on either side of the boat channel are these crab shanties, one-room stilt buildings in various stages of disrepair. It's like a blue-collar version of Venice. If this were one of the tourist boats, pretty much everyone at this point would be at the rails taking pictures. Haney says that what's happening on this side of the island, the east side, threatens Tangier's way of life more than any regulation.
What's happening on the east side?
Well, it's eroding. No protection, so just steady eroding away.
How quickly? Like, can you tell?
Yeah, you probably can tell each year. I mean, probably 8 or 10 feet each year.
An oft-cited study by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 2015 estimated that since 1850, Tangier has lost 2/3 of its landmass to the Chesapeake Bay. Talk to anyone on Tangier, and you're likely to hear them blame erosion for causing the island to shrink. And on this point, climate scientists totally agree. Relentless waves and high tides are tearing the island's marshy edges away, chunk by chunk. Where the two sides diverge is over the cause. Mayor Eskridge puts it this way.
And as far as the sea level rise, it may be happening, but it's just, it's so slow that we're not paying a lot of attention to it. Our main concern is erosion, and you can see the effects from erosion almost daily. Right. So that's what we're focusing on. I mean, erosion would destroy Tangier long before sea level rise would.
For their part, scientists say that the sea level has risen about a foot in the region over the past century for two reasons: from a warming climate and a sinking land surface. As we discussed a few episodes back, much of the lower Bay region is sinking because the underlying continental plate is still settling back into place from the past ice age more than 10,000 years ago. In addition, climate change is fueling stronger storms, most researchers think. The waves they whip up just eat away more of the land. Now, that Army Corps study I mentioned earlier, it predicted a dire future for Tangier Island. It estimated that the combination of sea level rise and erosion would obliterate most of the landmass by the year 2063. Higher ground along the 3 developed ridges would still peak above the water, but without its buffer of muck and marsh, those shards of land would be vulnerable to being washed over by passing storms. In the absence of significant flood protection measures, the authors concluded, the people of Tangier are in danger of becoming, quote, the first climate change refugees in the continental United States, end quote. Mayor Eskridge agrees that, yeah, Tangier is in trouble, just not for the reason that the experts say.
Like I said, I agree. The climate is changing. I'm just not convinced man is the cause of it.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's out of our control, really, and I think man is giving himself too much credit if he thinks he can control the climate.
Imagine being a climate change believer with no illusions about the likelihood of Tangier Island's demise, and deciding to move there anyway. It's time for me to introduce you to Norman St. Pierre. St. Pierre is the Cassandra of our story. Like the figure from Greek mythology, he sees disaster in the future, but many of his neighbors on Tangier Island don't see it that way.
So, unlike many people on this island, you are not a climate skeptic.
Oh, no, I'm a scientist, and the data, it's clear. This train has left the station.
It was my email exchange with St. Pierre that brought me to Tangier and to this story. Like he said, he is a scientist. His area of expertise is animal nutrition, specifically cows and chickens. But he has studied and written about climate change as part of his work. I'd initially contacted him about a study he'd worked on, calculating the cost to the livestock sector from global warming causing animals to overheat. He wrote back that he had a first-hand view of climate change as a resident of Tangier Island. He suggested that I come out and see it for myself. So that's how I came to be riding with an overnight bag at my feet through the narrow streets of Tangier with St. Pierre in his mule, a kind of heavy-duty golf cart.
Methodist Church.
All right. This is the center of town in a lot of ways.
This
right?
is where this is it now. This is downtown Tangier. You cannot have it more downtown than this. You know, you see all the people around. You see the big crowds. You see the traffic lights.
There are no traffic lights.
No traffic lights.
No crowds of people either. Since 2010, the population has plummeted 40%, from 727 residents to 438. Like much of rural America, the island is fighting the brain drain, watching its young go off to college, never to return. The only industries are seafood and some tourism. As Haney pointed out, it just keeps getting tougher to make ends meet working on the water. So many young men have turned to working on tugboats. It offers steady pay and good benefits, but with a steep trade-off. Shifts on the water can take you away from home for weeks, even months at a time. Life here is different in many ways. Virtually everything you see, the plywood for the porches, the pickups with no license plates, the bread on the shelves of the lone market, it all came here across the water. The island comes to life when the mailboat arrives at 1:15 in the afternoon each day.
That's where a lot of the goods transportation. This is one time between 1:15 and 1:30. You're going to see roadblocks here. It gets congested. You have all these golf carts and everything, and 2x4s, and it's pretty funny.
For all their dependence on outsiders, islanders go to great lengths to be self-sufficient. There's a community medical center with a full-time physician assistant. Children don't have to leave the island to be educated. The school is the last remaining public K-12 in the state. The island's electricity streams in through an underwater cable, but a diesel generator stands ready in case of emergencies. St. Pierre grew up in Quebec and spent much of his career as a professor at Ohio State University. Today, he telecommutes as a livestock scientist for Purdue, the multi-billion-dollar chicken company headquartered just across the water in Salisbury, Maryland. Eventually, I work up the nerve to ask him the obvious question.
Why in the world would you want to live on Tangier knowing what you know about climate change?
The part is, you don't see that problem on a daily basis, and this is an absolutely fascinating community to me. Some of the people have become my best friends. They can look after me and can look after my house when I'm gone. Really, some of the deep links that you used to have in smaller communities. Here, the people don't come and go. They're here, and I'm the one that just came in from, like the Canada Geese. They just slowly flew in.
To say Tangier residents have an independent streak would be an understatement. The population is almost uniformly Republican. About 9 in 10 voters here picked Trump in the 2020 election. Religion plays a much larger role in the day-to-day life here than in many parts of the country. The water tower is painted with a crab on one side and a cross on the other. The simple life isn't just practiced, it's revered. Having lived here for 4 years, St. Pierre sees a connection between this exceptionalism mentality and climate change skepticism.
They do feel that they are different than the rest of the mainland. You know, they have different values, and they do. They live differently, and they do. And so they are very reluctant to have anything from the outside world coming over here and telling them what they're supposed to do and not do.
That's one strike against climate change. Another, in St. Pierre's opinion, is that it's an abstraction. Erosion, meanwhile, is anything but. To illustrate his point, he drives us down to the southwest corner of the island, where the single lane of asphalt dissolves into sugar sand.
All right. Hey, where are we, by the way?
Right, we're on the south end of the island, and here we have the beach that goes down about a mile long. And
It's nice and sandy.
Yes, it is. Beautiful beach, and on a busy day you might see 10 people.
The beach is a picture of perfect isolation, a strip of sand backed by an impenetrable barrier of waist-high marsh grass. There's just not as much left of it as there used to be. A few decades ago, authorities erected a jetty on the west side of the island to protect the small airport there from further erosion. But the rocky seawall comes to a halt just at the northern end of the beach.
See that
Okay, there's where the jetty ends.
that's where the jetty that protects the airport, but it ends there. And since then, when you have a storm from the northwest, it breaks and then brings the waves even more on the beach. This last winter, we lost at least 30 feet of beach here. It even has dug some old foundations of houses. I hadn't seen that ever.
It looks like someone tried to make a little jetty there.
Yeah. No, that was actually the foundation of a house that you hear. And
I mean, are you serious? This is right by the water. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of looking at some bricks on top of bricks, maybe ankle high.
Yeah. At a very high tide, it breaks all the way here. And that didn't used to be that way.
So, erosion is this dramatic force in your life if you live on Tangier. But what about rising water?
If you live here, how do you see a rise of 6 to 8 inches of water in a century? You don't see that. And so, because you don't live that long, and so, but because you have the tide and the water, and so on, the very, very high tide, and
the tide varies by up to 2 feet. You were saying?
Yeah, 2 feet normal, and sometimes it will be 3 feet, and so it gets lost in the noise.
You can maybe start to see things from a Tangier native's point of view here. Sea level rise is glacially slow, or at least it has been. If it's happening at all, it's beyond your senses, anyone's senses really, to notice it. Now you're just supposed to accept some scientist theory that what you're seeing isn't what you're actually seeing? Good luck with that. Again, Mayor Eskridge.
That same summer after talking to the president, I went to New York City. CNN invited me to do a town hall with Al Gore, some other guests. I told him, I said, we don't see it. Like, the reason we're focused on the erosion, we can see it. We can see it happening. Sea level rise, it looks like it did when I was a child, as far as the sea level. Mm-hmm. And we're just not seeing it.
One thing I noticed in talking to people on Tangier is that climate denialism is exceptionally rare.
You mind saying your name and spelling it for me, please?
I'm Carol Moore, C-A-R-O-L-M, well, actually Pruitt, P-R-U-I-T-T Moore, M-O-O-R-E.
Do you hyphenate that? Or?
I do, yeah.
Moore was born and raised on the island. She raised 2 children here, and now has 5 grandchildren. I caught up with her on the second day of my visit, just as the wind was picking up and raindrops were beginning to fall. She's a favorite interview subject on the island, and you can see why. She speaks her mind. Moore repeated what others had told me about how the east side of the island has been breaking apart at an alarming rate. So I asked,
"What's causing this?"
What's causing this? I don't know what to say. As I told you before, I'm not a big believer in climate change and global warming, but I'm not stupid either. They exist, but that's not what's causing Tangier's demise. Erosion from the storms, the constant wave action, the constant winds, the constant tide, the constant current. It's just, I can see it from one time to the next when I go in the boat. I can see the land loss from one week to the next. I can see it.
her patience has long since evaporated for people who paint islanders as rubes who supported Trump against their own best interests.
From the comments that I read about stories like you are doing, it's like, let them go, let them go. They voted for Trump, let them go. I'm sure you read that. Well, it was...
It's something you saw.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Let them...
like idiots, 86% of the population voted for Donald Trump. So, woo, let them go.
Let them go, as in, let them drown, basically. This is about as much pessimism as I've heard so far on the island. It's hard to hear coming from Moore, who, just moments earlier, choked up describing how the town would turn out, flags flying, for the Memorial Day celebrations later in the month. She wants to spend the rest of her days here, but as we've heard on previous episodes, it's highly unlikely that we as a society will be able to save every community in the crosshairs of rising seas and stronger storms. Whether places like Tangier survive into the next century will depend on painful decisions made in the coming decades by people like Carol Pruitt Moore. To stay or to go.
So if they come here, they, government, whoever, with a buyout check,
Would I take
what do you
it?
say? Yeah.
I wouldn't think so. But with the hesitation, I wouldn't think so. No, see, that's something I wouldn't know. I don't know. I mean, if I had the assurance that I would be able to live on Tangier for the rest of my life, no. But if I knew a storm was coming to take us away, yeah.
Yeah, no, you paused a lot longer than I thought you would. I thought it would just be a no-brainer.
If you had asked me that maybe 3 years ago, it would have been no.
What happened?
I see that the government and the state of Virginia has forgotten about Tangier. sometimes I feel that Tangier is being used as some type of model for climate change and sea level rise. Like, hey, let's see how long those people will stay there until they're forced to leave.
She lowers her voice to a conspiratorial whisper and delivers her bottom line. If government funding for a seawall was conditional on her acceptance of climate change and sea level rise,
I'll be on that train.
So if they pass out a test and ask you, you will check that box.
Yes, I'll be on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have one more train of thought myself to discuss before we leave Tangier Island. We'll hop on that right after this last break.
Hi, this is Laura Lutz, editor at the Chesapeake Bay Journal. I hope you're enjoying our podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join the community of Bay Journal readers. If you care about climate change, wildlife, clean air, healthy communities, and of course the Bay and its rivers, you'll find news you can use at the Bay Journal, along with some great ideas for outdoor travel. Our subscriptions are free. Check us out at bayjournal.com and click on subscribe to start receiving the best independent environmental news in the Bay region.
Hello again. On this episode of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're tagging along on my trip to Tangier Island, Virginia, where the land is shrinking and the climate crisis is growing. Norman St. Pierre makes himself useful by repairing old bikes for his neighbors. He kindly lends me one of his to tool around the island. The entire landmass has withered to just over 1 square mile in size, but less than half of that is actually dry enough to support roads and homes. The developed areas are arrayed across 3 ridges, separated by shallow creeks that the locals call guts. The water, the marsh, the quaint little houses, and the birds, and the lack of traffic, it all combines for a truly pleasant biking experience. I'm on the western ridge when this hammering catches my attention. Hunched over, driving nails into a wooden walkway, Jared Parks returns my hello. An interview about climate change? Why not? I told you people were nice here. So are the dogs, I would soon learn. The boardwalk is just inches off the ground. And no sooner have I taken a seat beside Parks that Dolly the Bloodhound and Daisy, a mix of Labrador Retriever and Walker Coonhound, decide I need to be greeted.
It's a funny thing there's Dolly.
There.
When you have a small community like this, Daisy, get out of his face. Come on.
Parks is about 40 years old with 2 lanky sons. He worked for the State Marine Patrol for 13 years. A tough gig when many of the people you're sighting are your neighbors. Now he runs his own construction company, toiling exclusively on Tangier and Smith Island in Maryland, the other Chesapeake island that can't be reached by car. One of his specialties is something you don't ordinarily see elsewhere, but is pretty ubiquitous here.
I'm not sure there's much call for golf cart ramps on the mainland, but I build golf cart ramps and raised walkways. A lot of raised walkways.
What's the deal with golf cart ramps? Why do
they
people
raise
want
them up so if we have a catastrophic high tide, they'll be above the water?
This walkway outside his home has stood up well against the elements, but the periodic washing in and out of the salt-infused water has rusted the nails over time.
Screws rusted out, so I'm just nailing them down so nobody trips up and gets hurt.
Anything to extend life as he knows it on Tangier. That goes for bigger fixes too. The island will need help, federal help, to survive, he says. This time, its people can't just fend for themselves.
So many people get hung up on, well, I don't believe in sea level rise. Okay, I mean, call it whatever you want. Something's happening. Whether it's sea level rising or climate change or tidal erosion or whatever it is, something's happening and Tangier needs to be helped.
Like with Moore, I ask if he would take a buyout check and run to higher ground.
How much are we talking about? No, I'd like to stay. I mean, I'd really, I wouldn't want to say that, I left just because they waved a hefty sum at me, just because they wanted me out of here.
The 2015 Army Corps paper suggested that the cost of preserving Tangier Island would be $20 to $30 million. You can bet that number has grown since then because of the recent inflation and surge in price of construction materials. Some help did arrive last year with the completion of a new $2.6 million jetty on the west side of the island. The 500-foot breakwater was built just north of the airport jetty. It protects a key navigational channel that sweeps along the northern face of the island. The project had languished for years on the Army Corps' nationwide backlog. But then CNN came to town to report on the island's fragile future. Hearing of the report, President Trump placed his famous call with the town's mayor. Eskridge isn't sure whether that call led to the jetty project getting unstuck. He just knows that something jostled it loose.
It seemed after talking to the president, and I don't know what part he played in it, but I know just a couple years after talking to him, the seawall was in place, so.
Now, he and other islanders say, it's time to take action to shore up the eastern side of Tangier. I reached out to the Corps, and they sent a statement saying no jetty project is in the works as of this time. It would have to start from scratch with congressional approval of a study and construction. At minimum, the process would take 3 years. The federal government could employ a quicker solution called continuing authorities, but that would require a state or local cost-sharing partner, they said. So far, no one has volunteered. It may seem like a minor difference, sea level rise versus erosion, but when you're lobbying for protection from incoming water, you'd better be careful what you ask for. Let's look at this jetty that seems to be at the top of the town's wish list. The boulders for the jetties are usually placed in the water just offshore. They can blunt the impact of waves, which is good for erosion. But if seas are rising, well, that water just rises all around the rocks. They're no help at all in that case. Jetties would help buy time for Tangier, but without solutions to combat sea level rise, such as raising the land in key spots with fill or installing living shorelines, you're only addressing half the problem. As Eskridge sees it, Tangier has time to add fill and do what needs to be done to fight sea level rise. The more immediate issue is from erosion, he says.
And then once we stop the wave action, if the sea level is rising, we'll just build the island up.
Eskridge is optimistic that Tangier has a future, and the President of the United States agreed.
Donald Trump said it to me when we were talking on the phone. He said Tangier's been there for hundreds of years, and I believe it'll be here for hundreds more. So
I hope you guys are right.
I do too. And like I said, I'm convinced we'll get the help we need in time.
As Haney's boat motored away from the dock, taking me back to Crisfield on a gray and drizzly morning, I watched Tangier Island shrink into the distance. Within minutes, all I could make out was a tree line and the water tower above it. Before long, the entire island had disappeared, replaced by the white caps on the angry surface of the bay. Thanks to Greenfin Studio, which combines creativity and communications savvy with scientific insight. Visit greenfinstudio.com to see how they can help your organization engage a wider audience. Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you by the Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental news in the Chesapeake region. Production for this episode was by me, Jeremy Cox. The story was edited by Laura Lutz. Our marketing and advertising director is Jackie Kane. You can find more episodes of Chesapeake Uncharted on your favorite streaming service or at ChesapeakeUncharted.com. If you like what you're hearing, sign up for a free Bay Journal news subscription at BayJournal.com. Until next time, this has been Jeremy Cox. Take care.